Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Hope you're all having a great day. And with it being the off season and with free agency just a couple weeks away, and we're already seeing teams either rumored to be trading guys or already seeing rumors about who will be traded. I figured I'd do my predictions about who might get traded and who might end up being released or just staying on that team for 2026. So, with no further ado, let's get into it. And yeah, I have a list of about 30 ish guys on here that I believe um either could be traded or the team wants to trade them, and I have tiers on here. So let's get into it. Starting off with Alex Highsmith, and I'm gonna say it wouldn't shock me, just because Pittsburgh. I mean, I kind of thought last year they should have traded T.J. Watt, and he didn't have that great of a year, and he's clearly not as good as he once was a couple of years ago. But they paid him. You have Nick Herbig, who is going to need an extension now that he's extension eligible. And Alex Highsmith, I feel like, could get them something in return. It feels like the Steelers need to go into like a rebuild sort of way where it's like you trade away some of your best players, um, you get draft capital for them, and then you sort of aren't good for a couple of years. You get good players in the draft, and then you're able to build off of that. And I feel like, well, he's not guaranteed to be traded. I feel like it wouldn't shock me, or yeah. Moving on to AJ Brown, and I'm also going to put him wouldn't shock me. I'm actually going to put Alex Highsmith in 50-50. I think he's more likely to be traded than AJ Brown. AJ Brown, like, there's just been constant um scrutiny ever really since his second year in 2023, since he joined the Eagles. Like 2022 was there was not much, going on. The team made it to the Super Bowl and lost, but since 2023, the last three seasons, it's just been chaos with Brown and him arguing with coaches and players. And so while I think it's less likely than Alex Highsmith getting traded, I think AJ Brown, it wouldn't shock me if Philly just said we should move on and just try to have Devontae Smith as wide receiver one and just move on from Brown, and kind of like what they did in like the early 2000s with Terrell Owens, where it's like he was great on the field, but there was just so much backlash, with the stuff he said and did. It's kind of like with AJ Brown, like, and I feel like the Eagles eventually might just say, let's cut ties with him and move on. What about Anthony Richardson, which he's guaranteed to be traded? It was already reported that he was going to be requesting a trade and wants to be traded, which makes sense. Indy more than likely will be keeping Daniel Jones, and um, he will be the guy, not Anthony Richardson. And AR wants a fresh start. He has the potential. He's shown it in his first 2 years before being a backup and then being injured in 2025. And a team like the Rams, Vikings, teams who either have uncertain futures or maybe are looking for that long term guy with good offensive minded head coaches could look at Anthony and said, hey, we can develop him for a couple of years. We can turn him into the quarterback he was meant to be. And it would, like, he's guaranteed to be traded more than likely if he's requesting a trade in the next couple of weeks. And I think Indy is likely to move on from him, whether or not. Moving on to Buda Baker. I'm going to say in 50-50, just because I think the Cardinals should try to move off from him. Because we remember a couple years ago he requested a trade and then kind of walked it back, which you usually see with a lot of guys on like bad teams. They request trades and then things are starting to go where things just kind of like go back and everything's all good. But I think they should trade him, at least entertain trade offers. The team clearly needs to like hit a full reset because when they were hired Jonathan Gannon, like the team was bad, but like they didn't really go into like a full rebuild, which I think they do need to go in um for this one. And I think he kind of like Alan Highsmith should be traded, but if the team would trade him is another thing. Moving on to Brian Thomas Jr., which I'm gonna put in no trade. Like I've seen a lot of people float out rumors about BTJ being traded Jacksonville, having the success without him being that great and extending Jacoby Myers, having Parker Washington. But I don't think they're gonna like he had a great year in 2024. Didn't have that great year in 2025, but he's bound to bounce back. Year two under Liam Cohen, more familiarity with the offense. Like, I just don't understand why BTJ will be like people are throwing out he should be traded. Like, I think people more so are like, we should get him on a team where he's going to be more valued. But like, I also think with Travis Hunter being primarily a corner, making it seem like BTJ, Travis Hunter's going to be less involved in the offense, meaning that BTJ can still be, the team's top target or at least maybe secondary target behind Myers. So I don't think he gets traded at all. But on a Cole Komet, I'm going to say 50-50. I think most some guys around if we have like too many in one tier. But yeah, I think you draft Colston Loveland last year, which was clearly a Ben Johnson pick more than Ryan Poles. But Komet clearly still has the talent, but when you draft a guy in the first round at that same position and he's younger and neither Ben Johnson nor Ryan Poles has the connection with Komet because he was drafted by the previous regime and Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy. I think he could get traded, and the Bears might just say, let's try to trade away these guys. Um, Komet and I'm talking about another one, and have these younger guys have bigger roles in the offense, with Ben Johnson. And then speaking of Bears, DJ Moore, I think he does get traded this offseason. It seems likely. It's clear that Romo Dunze is, you know, at least they hope he's going to be the wide receiver one on this offense ahead of DJ Moore. You draft Luther Burden to be that third receiver, but you have two young guys in Odunze and Burden who Poles has drafted the last two seasons. DJ Moore clearly is kind of on the outs with the Bears. Like it seems like they're more so trying to develop Odunze and Burden. And I feel like a team, like the Raiders, maybe the Ravens, Steelers, teams in the AFC could say, hey, we could be able to trade for this guy and really be able to have another dynamic playmaker. And I think it makes sense for Chicago to move off of more instead of keeping him around when it's like his value might diminish. Moving on to Jordan Addison, I'm going to say wouldn't shock me. I'm not going to say in 50-50 because I don't think the Vikings need to trade him just because, wide receivers come at a premium and, you would hope that Addison would have a bounce back season. Um, but it wouldn't shock me because maybe Minnesota's like, maybe he peaked in his rookie year and he's been down ever since. Maybe we should try to move off from the guy and try to, bring in somebody else. Because, like, we've seen plenty of guys in the Kevin O'Connell offense have success at wide receiver, alongside Justin Jefferson. So maybe they're just like, we can move off from him. We can bring in somebody else. And because maybe they want to, sign Jalen Naylor, who's a free agent. So maybe they want to trade Addison and Naylor can be bumped up to wide receiver too. But on the Jalen Waddle, I'm going to say 50-50. I don't think it's guaranteed he is traded because he is still, pretty young. So it's like he clearly, might be valued by the new staff in Miami as a coveted piece to this rebuild, but he also could be a prior regime's draft pick that they might just say, hey, we can move on from him and we can at least try to get something for him instead of keeping him around. And so it's a possibility, but I think I'm going to say 50-50 just because he could be traded, but it seems more likely like he wouldn't be. Not a Keon Coleman. I want to put him in 100% gone because of how horribly the Bills organization has been throwing him under the bus. But, oh, do I want to say he's like definitely going to be traded? Or do I want to say, like, what it shocked me, I feel like it's more so guys who, like, could be traded but aren't really being rumored to. So, yeah, I would say he is going to be 100% gone because I feel like, the owner talking trash about him back at the press conference saying, it wasn't Brandon Beane's decision. And then there were so many clips of Beane saying he loved Coleman and was glad that he ran whatever he did so Coleman would be able to fall to the Bills. Um, but I just think like the bridge is kind of broken right there where it's like the Bills organization clearly, said some things that can't be just talked back. And I feel like the team might end up just saying, let's move on from him and give Keon Coleman a fresh start on an organization that maybe still believes there's something there. Kenny Clark. Ugh. I'm gonna say no trade because I think he ends up. Or do I say? I mean, he's still a fine player, but I'm gonna say nobody wants him. Honestly, like he was kind of a throw-in in the deal because Green Bay kind of needed to move on from somebody, and I think it's more likely he could get released, which is why I was hesitant to put him in no trade. I think even if Dallas wanted to trade him, I don't think anybody wants him. Like he's a fine player, but he's not really that great, especially at his age. But on to Kyler Murray, I think he's definitely going. Like, there's all indicates that the Cardinals want to move on from him. They want to trade him, and he's 100% gone. Like, there's going to be a team out there, whether it's the Jets, the Dolphins, maybe the Falcons. Like, there's a team out there that's going to trade for Kyler Murray because he still has talent. Like, a lot of the times when these teams are moving on from QBs, it's usually because they like there's a new regime that isn't connected to them, and they just want to move off and just clear the air. But Murray still has the talent. He was a number one overall pick for a reason. You don't just randomly become the number one overall pick, and he has the talent, and he's most definitely like he's probably alongside like Anthony Richardson more likely to be traded of these 100% gone than these two guys. But I think more than likely all four get traded this offseason, and Kyler's definitely up there. Around to Kayvon Thibodeau, I'm gonna say it wouldn't shock me because And you have Brian Burns, who's making a lot of money. They drafted Abdul Carter third overall to clearly be the Robin to um Burns Batman. So clearly Thibodeau's kind of fallen down the leaderboard for, edge rushers, but he was still really good. And it wouldn't shock me, but I feel like, 1 year left on his deal. He could be shipped off, but I feel like the Giants either will try to extend him to like maybe like a 3 year deal to keep him around, or they'll try to wait until like the season and then maybe trade him. But on to Lucas Van Ness, I'm gonna say it wouldn't shock me either. A young player who just has not really played that great his first couple of years, and then he's behind Rashawn Gary and Micah Parsons, who are the clear top guys in Green Bay. And it might just be time for Green Bay to move on. Like, you usually see this a lot of times with former first round picks who don't work out. Usually teams usually after 3 years, teams usually try to, move off from the guy. Like, remember last off season, we saw like Kyer Elam, um, from the 2022 class got traded. Like, we could see a guy in Van Ness who maybe still has some potential, but isn't going to definitely be as good as maybe his pre-draft indicated. And Green Bay might just want to move off from him and get some draft capital for a guy who probably won't be a Packer after this season. We're on to Max Crosby. I'm gonna say 50-50. I think he's extremely like 100% going to be gone because he has said that he wants to be a Raider, but there are also indications that he more than likely, or the Raiders said it would take like a haul, but like there's been reports that like bridges have been burned between him and the Raiders after they put him on IR when he still clearly could play late in the season last year. So it is possible that he might just say, I'd rather be traded than stay on this team, but maybe, he still wants to play for them and no team is willing to give them like a serious offer for Crosby. But it's either like the team like doesn't want to move off from him, or he doesn't want to be traded, or like everything's been burned and Crosby just will not be a Raider in 2026. We're on Marlon Humphrey. I'm gonna say he doesn't get traded. I think he ends up either being released or the Ravens like slice his cap hit in half because he's making way too much money to be kept on that contract, but it's either the Ravens restructure it so that they can free up some money, or the team just flat out releases him. Because I don't think a team's going to trade for him. I think they more so wait for him to be cut and then try to sign him. So I think he either gets restructured or the Ravens just flat out cut him and let him enter free agency. We're on to Mac Jones. I'm going to put him in 50-50. I would have said 100%, but there's reports that the Niners want to keep him. So maybe Sam Fran says we'd rather keep him for one more year and have him as our backup. And if Purdy gets injured, which the last couple of years have shown is definitely possible, the Niners might just say we'd rather have a backup we know can play well instead of trading him away and then either drafting a guy or bringing somebody else in who, might not be as talented or doesn't know the offense as well. Around to Michael Mayer, I'm going to say it wouldn't shock me. Another 2023 draftee who is on the final year of his contract. And look, when you draft Brock Bowers, after having Michael Mayer, it indicates that like you're not attached to Mayer, and that you view him as, the tight end too. And there were reports last year that he could have been traded. It ended up not happening. And then he had a really good year when Bowers got injured, but clearly his workload isn't going to be as high as it was because Bowers is going to be more healthy this year. And I could see the Raiders just saying, hey, wait, he's got 1 year left on his deal. Let's get something for him. And because if he leaves in free agency, they might get a comp pick, but maybe you can trade him away and get something higher than they might actually get. Michael Pittman, I'm gonna say wouldn't shock me, mainly because he could be cut, which a lot of people have been saying, but at the same time, maybe a team would try to trade for him and take on his cap hit because the Colts are trying to keep both Daniel Jones and Alec Pierce, and Pittman might just be the odd man out on that team, maybe somebody else. Um, but I think he either gets cut and then the Colts are able to bring back Jones and Pierce, or maybe he gets traded. Like it wouldn't shock me, but I think it's less likely. Yeah, because like the guys that wouldn't shock me, I feel like it wouldn't shock me if I saw that they were traded, you know, during the off season. But it's less likely than these guys who are like it could go either way, but would be traded. We're on to Nate Hobbs. I don't think I don't think they would trade him. I mean, I saw this article that put him as a trade candidate for this offseason, so that's why I put him in this video. But I don't think he ends up getting traded. I think Green Bay's locked in with probably bringing in more corners than moving on from some, and I think it more than likely they wouldn't trade him. Quentin Johnston, I'm gonna put him in wouldn't shock me or 50-50 because do I think the Chargers would move on from him? I'm gonna say wouldn't shock me just because I don't know if the Chargers would trade him just because he had a disappointing first couple of years, played really well in 2025, and showed he can be a contributing piece to this offense. And I don't know if Joe Ortiz would want to move on from him. We'll see what happens if they pick up his 5th-year option or not. But I feel like it's less likely that he gets moved on from. But maybe the team wants to trade off of him and have McConkey and Harris be the top two guys, and maybe get some value for him if they aren't going to pick up his 5th-year option. Went on to Riley Moss. I'm also going to say that he doesn't get traded. I mean, I saw reports that he could be moved on from, so that's where I saw. But I don't think the Broncos would trade him away. At least I don't think they would um, move off from him. Maybe right now. Like, I mean, they did draft today Barron, so maybe you could say, oh well, wouldn't they just move on from Riley Moss and have Barron have a bigger role? That is possible, but I think they would at least keep Moss for 1 more year and then maybe explore um because he is a free agent after the season, so maybe they would just keep him around and just get a comp pick. Tanner McKee is an interesting one because I think a lot of people remember Kenny Pickett getting traded last year, and they're like, "Oh, would the Eagles trade another backup?" I'm gonna say it's. I don't think that he gets traded. I know some people might say, "What if there's a desperate team out there that could trade for him?" That is possible, and but I think Philly would keep him unless like a team like is trading a quarterback back with them, or maybe they get something that like they're like, "Oh, he could he's a lot better than this draft pick, but we can get that for him. Trent McDuffie, I'm gonna put in 50-50 just because I've seen a lot of people and a lot of reports say that the Chiefs could move on from him. Same thing with L'Jarius Sneed they did a couple of years ago. A lot of people are hinting that McDuffie could be moved on from. A lot of people also, like Chiefs fans and Rams fans, have clearly been liking McDuffie to the Rams for pick 29, something else. So I think if KC doesn't want to pay him, and if they'd rather try to bring back like Jalen Watson, um, and move on from McDuffie, then it is possible. But I could also see them just keeping him, trying to work out extension, and keeping him in KC for the long term. Tua, I don't. I think he ends up getting cut. I don't think any team wants it. Like, I just think it's a bad contract, and like unlike Kyler, who like he still has like the tools, and like a team could say, hey, healthy Kyler in a different offense, he could play well. But I think Tua, just with so many injuries, like not just the concussions, but so many other injuries, and his play was horrible this year. Like Kyler's play was not bad, but it wasn't that great. But like Tua was like horrible. I mean, he got benched at the end of the year. So I think Miami will try to trade. I've even heard reports that they might try to, hold on to some of the money. Like they would take on some of the money so that the other team would not be taking on a huge cap hit. But I think more than likely he gets released and Miami just takes on that huge cap hit and he like signs like what Russell Wilson did a couple of years ago. Moving on to Walker Little. I mean, I don't think he ends up getting traded. I mean, I saw an ESPN article that said the Browns could trade for him, Jacksonville get some draft capital, but I don't think. I mean, I know he's a part of this regime's, and they could, because we saw them last year trade away Tyson Campbell, you know, for Greg Newsome. So like clearly they're not attached to like all the players, but I don't think they would move off from Walker Little unless like a team like is like desperate for a tackle and they just throw out some picks and James Gladstone says, "Hey, we could get this or we could keep the guy." I'm on to Will Levis. I'm gonna put him in 50-50 just because I could see Tennessee wanting to keep him around as a backup, kind of like what the Texans did with Davis Mills after they brought in C.J. Stroud. Like they kind of kept Mills as a um backup since Stroud was drafted in 23, and they've kind of kept him as like this older, not really older veteran, but like as his backup. So I can see Tennessee wanting to keep Levis like the final year of his deal as Cam Ward's backup. Now that he'll be healthy, because he missed all of 2025 recovering from I think it was hand surgery that he got injured in 2024. But I could also see Tennessee, saying kind of like with the Colts with Andy Richardson saying, maybe we should move on from this guy, and maybe a team that either has QB issues and maybe wants to bring in somebody to compete, or is looking for that long term guy, might just end up, trading, giving Tennessee like maybe a fourth or fifth, and Tennessee's like, hey, we can just bring in a veteran backup and we can ship off Levis for this price. Moving on to Xavier Legette. I'm gonna say it wouldn't shock just because he's been outperformed by Jalen Coker, who was an undrafted free agent from the same draft in 2024. Ted McMillan, um, overtook Leggett as the top target. And while he has had some good games, he hasn't really been the greatest receiver in his first 2 years. And maybe the Panthers just want to move off from him. They had McMillan and Coker. Maybe they'll sign some guys in free agency, and Leggett could be the odd man out of the wide receiver room. And the Panthers just might, you know, take him. Like they'd rather, what's the word? Like they'd rather just say they, made a mistake with drafting Leggett, kind of like what the Bills would do with Keon Coleman, and just move on. I'm not a Minka Fitzpatrick. Um, I'm gonna say he's definitely gone because Miami's already been fielding reports, fielding calls, trade calls for him. So it's clear that John Eric Sullivan wants to trade Fitzpatrick, wants to get some draft capital, and I mean they've been, releasing Tyreek Hill and Bradley Chubb. Now in my trade Minka Fitzpatrick, Miami, Eric Sullivan is just basically trying to tear this roster down and try to build it up his way. We'll see if it works out, but I think he's definitely gone. I think Minka is for sure going to leave. Jordan Davis, oh, it's a debate between wouldn't shock me or 50-50. I'm gonna say it wouldn't shock me. And I think I'm gonna put Jermaine Johnson in 50-50 just because Jordan Davis and they're both from the 22 class and both have 1 year left on their contract. Jordan Davis had a productive year, much better than his 2024, but 1 year left on his deal. Clearly, Jalen Carter's the more, bigger priority for Philly to lock up than Jordan Davis, you would think. And, they've kind of always had good defensive linemen. Like Milton Williams, was, late round draft pick in 2021, becomes, one of the best players on the team and they gets a huge contract. So they might just say, you know, we know how to develop these defensive linemen. We can trade away Jordan Davis. We have guys who can immediately fill his spot, and we can get some very valuable draft capital for a guy who might end up leaving us in 1 year. And Jermaine Johnson, I think, is more likely because, well, it's a different regime. Like Howie Roseman drafted Jordan Davis, and Nick Sirianni was the head coach, so they are both there. It's a new regime, and we already saw Darren Musi move off from both Sauce Gardner and Quentin Williams, and he even gave Sauce an extension in the offseason and traded him. And then was fielding calls for Brees Hall and almost did trade him. So it's clear that Muji, wants to move on from a lot of the Joe Douglas picks and wants to bring in his own guys. And Jermaine Johnson might end up being another guy where it's like, especially if like the Jets draft, like let's say they go with like Ruben Bain or David Bailey or Arvell Reese at number 2, those guys could, be starting right away alongside Will McDonald. And Jermaine Johnson might just be the odd man out of the edge rushers. And Muji might try to move off from another guy from that 22 class and try to get something for him. But yeah, that'll do it for today's video. I figured, with the off season here, that I, say, yeah, I'd give you a tier list of where I think some of these guys, if they could be moved, might be moved or wouldn't be moved. But hope you guys enjoy the video. Hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And I'll catch you guys in my next video. But until then, hope you have a great day and bye.